right, it is Friday, punk rockers, and we are back with another edition of Punk Rock Politics, the podcast. I'm Mitch Maley, joined by Brendan Ragan, and we're going to start off with the 100-day report card of Uncle Joe Biden. The presidential reign is now 100 days in, right, Brendan?
It feels like 100 days, too. It doesn't feel like, when Trump was president, I always caught myself saying, like, it feels like it's been 10 years and it's been like 1 year, but it feels like it's been about 3 months, right?
Well, I think before Trump, nobody even realized it was like, oh, 100 days? Okay. Like you didn't even pay attention that much, and then it was just kind of like, oh, yeah, 100. I guess that sounds about right. But now it's taken, I guess, a gravity that it hasn't had before. But yes, I agree. It feels like about 100 days.
Yeah. Okay. So, as is tradition, we grade our president on his first 100 days. And I have a number of categories here that we're both just going to give him a quick grade, maybe a little sentence on why we think that. And overall, then we'll calculate his GPA. We absolutely won't do that calculation, but maybe we'll see a trend emerge. So let's start with the pandemic. What do you give Joe on handling the pandemic so far?
I think you have to give him an A. I think the rollout of the vaccine has been extremely successful. I think you can question the J&J pause.
Yep.
I think that's fair. I think it was a rock and a hard place situation where if you don't, you have the anti-vax movement, just rabidly going after you. But I think that just from a logical perspective, that might have been a bad move. But the fact that we've gotten so many people who've wanted to be vaccinated, the fact that the numbers, with the exception of a few hotspots, have been, very under control compared to a lot of other places in the world. I find it hard not to give him an A.
Yeah, I think I give him an A too. I think the big question is actually coming for his next 100 days, which is once all of the folks who really want a vaccine are vaccinated, and we're starting to turn that corner where the demand is slipping a little bit. What do you do to turn the people who are 50-50? And then can you create some kind of informational campaign to turn some of the people who are a hard no into a maybe or a yes at this point? And I understand that you can't do any of that because the demand has outpaced the supply, but we're about to change on that. So his next 100 days is convincing some of those folks. And by the way, these are people who don't want government telling them to do anything. So good luck, Joe. Category number 2, how about the fight for 15? What do you give him?
F.
I was tempted to give him an F too. I'm going to give him a D-, and here's why. He must listen to the Punk Rock Politics podcast because I don't know if you remember 7 or 8 weeks ago, Elsie was still here. I made the argument that, Joe, if you really cared about the fight for 15...
And it seems like you've been gone for more than 100 days, Elsie.
We truly miss you. She'll come back and join us one day. If you truly care, I said, why not do the same thing with masks, where you give a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour to all of the low federal wage workers throughout the whole country. He didn't do that. Well, guess what? He just did that, I think, about a few days ago. He finally said 300,000 federal employees, no one will be making less than $15 an hour. About time. So I have a tiny little grain of hope that means that enough. it's not
we're fighting over D- or
yeah,
so.
No, I don't think we're fighting about it. We both agree that he's been terrible. Okay, how about the economy overall?
I think I'm going to stand on the idea that I have for a long time, which is that presidents have very little control over the economy. They could shit the bed on it, or they can be very proactive in ways that the government can do things. But there's not a whole lot the government could do beyond spending fiat currency. They're somewhat control of the interest rates via the Fed. And tax policy, I think that tax policy can improve. I think that they're testing the waters on that. I think tax policy is the driver of our economic inequality, which is the root cause of so many social ills. So it's going to be a high bar for me in that I know the work and the pragmatism of changing the tax code in a way fundamentally makes a difference of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's a long road to hoe. I don't know that they're going to have the appetite for it, but I'd say he didn't shit the bed on the economy. So he did nothing that blew it up in the negative direction.
A solid B then.
Yeah.
I think you're right in that he hasn't done anything wrong. The size of the recovery package was good. He tried to go too big instead of too small, which is the right idea that most economists say. You're right with the tax, the long road of tax reform that we need. He's headed the right way, and I think, man, he's taxing and spending in a way that Democrats in years past would love to be able to be doing, which is cool. And he's also sort of leaning into this idea that everyone who's a millionaire and a billionaire during the pandemic got a lot richer, and that it's a really good time to say, how are we going to pay for all this? Easy. We'll tax corporations and we'll we'll close some of the loopholes on millionaires.
And another thing I think that benefited anyone in that mindset is a sharp turn in public perception.
Yeah.
Where you had even 5 years ago, especially 10 years ago, if you go back to 2010, 2012 presidential election, look at some of the rhetoric, there was still a pretty broad consensus from everyone on the right and a good half of the left.
Many of the quote unquote left.
That all, we shouldn't punish success. You don't want to stop innovation. All this kind of rhetoric that says whatever you do, don't make the 1% pay what middle-class workers do in effective tax rates. And that rhetoric had taken root over decades of really good, well-funded propaganda. And people finally woke up to it. And I think that's one of the things that happened in the pandemic where I think what you just said was what crystallized, like, wait a minute, they're even continuing to get richer when the world's shutting down?
Yeah, and actually accelerating their wealth.
Yes. How is this not a stacked deck, a rigged casino when even under, so any circumstances, economy's hot, they make money. Economy's cold, they make even more money. It's a time where it's unique, I think, in recent American history, where you have, populist facets on both the left and the right, and then just the average American saying, yeah, we've done this whole trickle-down thing for a long time, and then it's only getting worse.
Right, we shut down the economy, and the whole entire middle class fell apart. I mean, see, that's how completely what a house of toothpicks it was built on. Right, and I think that became clear, and he's leaning into that. I think what's fascinating about his large spending packages and how to pay for them is that the packages overall are pretty popular. They're in the 60 to 70% range, pretty much all of them. The infrastructure, the American Families Plan. The way that he's going to pay for them is actually even more popular than the plans themselves, and that is taxing rich people and taxing corporations.
Yes,
people
there's
like
definitely
that.
An appetite for, hey, there's too much inequity, and this idea that these are just the smartest, hardest working people just doesn't bear out, because people are seeing that we have this system that has entrenched itself over the last 2 decades of socialized failure and free market success. So if you win, you get to keep all the money. And hey, if you're in the Fortune 500, chances are you won't even pay taxes. And then if you lose, we'll come and bail you out anyway. So just try to manipulate your stock price and just go for the short term and just try to milk whatever profits you can get, or even perceive profits so that the analysts on Wall Street like your stock this week, next month, whatever, and stop even trying to make a good product that you sell well and provide a good service to the economy, because that's not how you get rich in 2021.
No, not anymore. You got to jump through the loopholes and know the system. And so he's saying all the right things about closing those loopholes. And he's certainly very willing to deficit spend. And he's pretty progressive on a lot of those fronts, which is
much
fairly
more
interesting.
progressive than the Joe Biden we've known for a long time.
That's for sure.
No question on that.
All right, so moving on to the next category, healing the soul of the nation. That was his catchphrase in the election.
Well, the bar is low there, isn't it, Brendan?
I sort of look at this the same way I look at everyone sort of demanding that he unify the country.
Right.
I mean, there's so much polarization.
Right. And Jesus couldn't come back to earth and unify the country right now. Absolutely. That's a bar way too high.
Yeah.
I'm just happy there's nobody rage tweeting at 3 a.m.
Yeah, and listen, if we're grading healing of the soul of the nation independently on its own, it's like a D-. It hasn't gotten a lot better. If we're grading Joe, he's done a really nice job being very sympathetic, showing his heart, speaking directly to all of the families who've lost someone to COVID. I mean, he is sort of like a warm old grandpa in that regard.
Here's what I appreciate the most about that aspect. I love the fact that he's not on social media.
Yep.
And that he refuses to take the bait on culture war issues.
That's
Dr.
true.
Seuss, the nonsense this week about Joe Biden doesn't want us eating red meat, and all the fake news that's coming out.
Hasn't taken the bait.
Get up on a pedestal and start pontificating on how unfair it is.
Right.
He just laughs it off and talks business.
He could have done a solid 20 minutes of material on just the All-Star game.
Yes.
And Trump would have done that.
Right.
Pro or con, who cares? That was a prime opportunity. Biden didn't even really check in.
Not
I think
making it about himself,
Yeah.
and not trying to stick his thumb in the opposition's eyes at every opportunity. In fact, avoiding that, like with really, really impressive discipline. Where when you look at some of the things he heard about himself in the run-up to the election, to not want to dunk on anyone right now, I think that shows an impressive amount of self-restraint.
Yeah, he really has taken to being the let's just work and shut up kind of administration. And the critics are even saying, like, where is he? He's not talking to the press enough. And it's like, well,
That's fine.
that's great. I'm fine with that.
And here, let me add one thing. The other part is the idea that he's not alienating the left as blatantly as I thought he would. There's an opportunity right here as he's trying to, he doesn't really obsess on the bipartisanship part, which I think might be a fool's errand in one regard.
I think it's a total fool's errand.
Okay.
There's no unifying right now. But there is the question, can he unify the left?
Well, here's another question on that, though. From a strategic standpoint, he doesn't have to unify the Republican Party, but is it a very shrewd tactic to show the moderate Republicans and independent voters, look, man, I'm trying every time.
I think it's a
See
great
me putting
tactic.
a hand out there. I don't think he thinks he's going to get the bipartisan legislation so much as he could eventually come back in 2 years.
He
and
may not
say,
even get a single
vote,
Republican
right.
vote on anything.
Right.
But what's very different about this administration is, you're right, he is demonstrating an olive branch.
Yes.
He's saying, if you would like to talk about it, let's do it. Turns out we're way too far apart on this, so we're going to do our thing. And, if you listen to his speech from the other night when he was addressing the nation, it was a heavy-duty, middle, working class, centrist, we are doing this for the little guy kind of speech, which he really didn't have. I mean, again, you talk about a new Joe Biden. That's not the Joe Biden of the 90s in the Senate at all.
Right.
All right, moving on. Foreign relations. This is one where I really do have some critiques on him. What do you give him on foreign relations so far?
Again, a low bar, really low bar
Seriously.
coming into it, because what we did to our reputation with, our allies, as well as some of the countries that we have working but contentious relationships with, I'd have to give him a solid B on this. I think that, this has always been one of his strong parts. He's always had good relationships with foreign leaders, and he's always been firm enough where people know you're not going to just steamroll him. So I think he's doing a good job of getting out and repairing relationships, and then also establishing with some of those more adversarial countries such as Russia, Iran, Syria. Hey, listen, that other nonsense over, it's back to American accountability. And I like that a lot better than what we had. So I've got to give him a B there.
And Trump put him in a lot of difficult situations where, he was rocking a hard place. What do you do now? What do you do with the tariffs on China now? There's no good answer there. I look at basically all of the information coming out about the Crown Prince and Jamal Khashoggi being murdered, and it being directed by the Crown Prince, and basically there being no consequence other than Biden said, now the world knows he's a murderer. That was essentially his response to that. I thought that was pretty weak.
Well, here becomes the legit question. I got to be honest, I really liked that Trump brought this up, in that we have a, historically dicey record when it comes to applying our standards of human rights to countries in a very hypocritical manner.
Yep.
And, so when Trump answered, I think it was Bill O'Reilly, and said something to the effect of, when he talked about Putin being a murderer, something about, we do a lot of terrible things too.
You're right. Yeah. He had
Bill O'Reilly's like, wait, it's different when we do it because we're the good guys. And it's like,
we're not so innocent, I believe he said.
Yeah. And the idea of, I think it's absolutely horrific that Khashoggi was murdered. However, we're talking about a regime that we've been friendly with for decades, right? Since going back to the 70s and the deal with the devil we sort of struck after the oil embargo and the petrodollar and our reserve currency and all that. But they've been leading the world in public beheadings. They've had the worst human rights record in terms of women's rights. They've had all of these great reasons to detangle ourselves from our relationship with them that even as a journalist, I'm looking at it going, really, guys, this is it? It's kind of like, this is the one that we're going to die on. Okay. But at the same time, it's like, you really needed this to let you know that's the kind of country this is?
It's like you're hanging out with murderers and then they murder one of your friends. And,
right.
And you've been okay with it for so long that now you have to say, you're right. You got to draw the line in the sand and say no more murder. I don't know. I think there has to be more that could be done there than simply saying, well, we found out that it was you and now everybody knows it was you. There's nothing there. And I also think, listen, we know for a fact the SolarWinds attack was Putin. We know for a fact he meddled in our elections. What did Biden do? He kicked out a few diplomats. I mean, again, he promises a firm response, but there hasn't been a whole lot yet. He's had his hands full, but what's different about the relationship now than with Trump? Certainly, they're not buddy-buddy, and Trump's was covering for him all this time, but it feels like now that we have someone in charge who's willing to name him, there still haven't been a whole lot of consequences for Russia and Putin, especially. So, we'll see. I have him at a solid C for that. All right, moving on. How about this one? Protecting the donor class.
Oh, God, A+. A+ all the way.
He wants to raise their taxes,
a little tiny bit, and they're kicking and screaming as though somebody took away their golden pacifiers.
Yeah, I give him a B+ on that only because he has at least said that he would like the capital gains tax to basically double. I think that's a good one.
You know what I saw? I saw a segment somewhere where estate jewelry sales were skyrocketing because all of these really, really wealthy people are looking to search for tax shelters where if they buy rare jewelry, it's somehow more tax advantageous when it's passed on to their heirs than cash would be. All these ways of saying, you're not taking any of ours, even though, and this is really what I wish the average American person understood better, even though that mountain of cash was mostly made off of government spending, deficit spending. That's what they're benefiting off of. If you look at the people who have made tremendous amount of money over bank stocks in the last 10 years, over investment banking stocks over the last 10 years, all military industrial stocks over the last 20 years where we've been at war constantly through the whole thing and they've just been splitting and splitting and splitting. Yeah. Tech stocks in ways that we haven't gone after corporate monopolies. So when you look and you say, our neoliberal economic policies have benefited you disproportionately, you have built these enormous empires of fortune that you can never spend.
Yeah.
And you just think you should keep all of it. That even when you die, like none of it should pass on back into the system that created it so we can create more for other people. No, me and mine.
Yeah, by the way, that's the way to create an oligarchy.
Yes, absolutely.
If you just have this generational wealth that passes on endlessly from one generation to the next and the next and the next, and it never gets taxed, and it just grows and grows and grows, that's like the best thing you could do to create an oligarchic class that's untouchable.
Because the other reason for our progressive tax system, one of the main reasons that was what we chose to implement, it has the very simple reason of we felt that in a democratic society, if too many people or too few people controlled too much wealth, the amount of influence they would have over the democratic process would be dangerous. And we've been there now for decades where it's like, you couldn't possibly pass that legislation because, 100 billionaires wouldn't like it. And they count more than 400 million people.
Yeah. And so just to circle back to the topic here, if you think that Joe Biden has really done things to take on the donor class, just remember that Wall Street actually gave Biden more money than Trump in the 2020 election
Business
cycle.
as usual.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Moving on. How about the climate and the environment? I'm giving him a solid B. Not a whole lot has changed, but he did get rid of the Keystone Pipeline. He just recently held that climate summit, that international climate summit. He rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. So he's done some things, but I think
I think it's, again, a low bar. And I think that, again, you're dealing with such a divisive issue that you're only going to be able to move the needle slowly.
And a lot of this comes in potentially this infrastructure bill where we're putting a bunch of money into renewables. And if he can push that through, that certainly raises this grade.
Here's my big warning on the infrastructure bill. And here's what I'm very concerned about is that the way this looks like it's going to shake out is that there's going to be a lot of money leaking out of it. And, one public policy analyst that I read a paper by, I thought put it best, where he basically compared FDR's New Deal to any kind, this isn't specific to Biden, but any kind of modern economic libertarian, neoliberal spending policy, is that instead of the government doing it and having accountability, it will all run through consulting firms like McKinsey, who are really, really good at understanding how to drive those prices in those estimates way up, so they come in way over budget estimates, and then the companies make as much as possible with them taking big, hefty fees off the top, and the amount that gets drilled down into the economy for the economic benefit, aside from the environmental benefit, is really watered down. So I see a lot of that happening, and I really hope we can move in a different direction.
Yeah, we'll see what the oversight on that will be, because anytime you've got a program this big, it's going to be riddled with fraud. And in America's case, our fraud happens by consulting firms in broad daylight.
Yeah.
Overall, let's look at healthcare as an incomplete. He hasn't done anything to create a public option or change healthcare other than in the recovery bill. He strengthened Obamacare. There was additional subsidies. So it's not like he's done nothing, but he's done very little.
No, I think it's a mess. And I got to be honest, I think he's not revisiting Obama's mistake, in that I felt Obama became obsessed with the healthcare too early and said, I'm going to get this rammed through before we possibly lose, any of the congressional authority we have in 2010, which,
they did.
Proved to be smart in that regard. But the amount of focus it took off everything else, and then what it inhibited across every other spectrum, was a cost that I don't think was bore out by what we eventually got for it.
And Biden is governing like he knows he's got 2 years.
Yeah.
He's getting the big stuff done that, like, in order of ease.
Yes, and that would be one thing. Like, if he dumped that on with this now, everything else would suffer.
And it would grind to a halt.
Yes, and probably not getting anything really accomplished in that department anyway.
Yeah, that's why I give him an incomplete. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what you don't want to lose all of the other progress.
I'm kind of happy if we could just leave that in place for right now and work on other stuff.
Yeah, but I bet you they'll go back to debating about it when we've got a split government again. All right, how about the National Police Commission?
Let me add one thing real quick. And I think the other part that might change that is that I think, if anything, the pandemic helped tame down some of the sort of disingenuous public angst that was out there for any kind of public health care. And I think it just opened up everybody's mind to, some people need help sometimes.
Yeah.
And you can't just do it on your own. And there's all kinds of situations that might not be a pandemic that I'm experiencing that someone else might be, just like unemployment and all the different things. I think it led to greater empathy for things like healthcare.
That's true. And I think a lot of people are realizing, wow, healthcare, exclusively being tied to employment is terrible.
It's a bad idea. Yeah.
Is terrible, especially when so many people can lose employment so quickly that now they have all this extra
and that,
burden.
The history of that, I'm not sure if you know, it was kind of an accidental thing. It was when healthcare was really cheap and doctors were still making house calls. it was a way, because of the tax code, when we used to have much more and higher brackets, it was a way where employers said, and organized labor was also really powerful, so they had to negotiate contracts, and it was a way where they said, hey, this is a way that we could increase your compensation in a way that you won't lose a bunch of it to taxes. So instead of having going out and get these things on your own, like a pension and savings and healthcare, what if we gave you these things called benefits that weren't taxed as income, and then you still took home the same amount of money, and instead of that raise that you're going to lose mostly to the government, and in those days in particular, we're going to just give you other stuff you'd have to go out and buy. And everybody said, hey, that's a great idea. And then it just became entrenched into American society up until and including the times when healthcare got enormously more complicated, much more technological. Aside from all the administrative complications, it just became a much more high-tech industry. And then we looked around and said, oh, shit, this doesn't really work anymore. But how do we detangle an entire society doing something for 100 years one way and replace it?
Right.
Well, we do that with national health care. And that's when it was like, oh, that's socialized medicine.
Right. Well, hey, we've all gotten a little tiny taste of socialized medicine.
And I think everybody found it didn't taste as bitter as they'd anticipated or been led to believe.
How many people do you think would be vaccinated if they cost $35?
Less.
A whole lot less. Yeah. Probably less than half.
And if they cost 100, right?
Yeah, forget it. If these manufacturers were actually making a profit, yeah, they'd probably charge $250. Forget it. So yeah, the socialized medicine, I think we all said, yeah, I'll take some. I'll have some of that. All right, so we're going to return to one of his big things that he was campaigning on, and rightly so, because we were in the middle of a big racial crisis last summer, was he was running on creating this National Police Commission. He hasn't done that. He has supported the George Floyd police bill, and he has pushed for things like ending qualified immunity and creating commissions, and his Justice Department is looking at another city that we were looking at before. Last week we were talking about Minneapolis. The Justice Department has added a city to that this week. But not a whole lot's been done, and it feels like an issue that he's content to talk about and feel like that's his success. I'm saying the right things, but are we going to get police reform? Is the justice and policing bill going to pass?
We need the temperature to cool a bit. To be very frank with you,
when is that going to happen?
I don't know.
Yeah,
it's one of those things where it's like I wish that we'd get to a little break in the incidents and the news cycles, so that I think right now the challenge is we're so deeply divided on the issue that a half a loaf is going to be worse than none for both sides. Yeah. And I think that maybe the smart politics is if we could drag our feet on that part of it, we'll end up with something better at a lower political cost. That's my political hunch on it. Yeah. And I think that's good politics, even if it's not good public policy in terms of what society needs.
Like getting anything done, right?
I don't know that we'll get anything done anyway, though. I think we would spend a lot of political capital to come away with very little.
I think a big issue near the election was obviously the Supreme Court. Remember, everyone wanted to know, will you expand the Supreme Court? And Joe sort of played this beautifully. I thought he was coy about it. He said, we'll look at things and I'll announce my decision soon. He teased it out and he finally said, my big Supreme Court decision is I'll create a commission to look at it. Right. I think he was kind of doing the same thing with this, but he actually created that Supreme Court commission to some degree. We haven't heard anything about it. We probably won't for a while, if ever. But he didn't even create this National Police Commission. I think he's trying to push this George Floyd Justice and Police bill, and I don't see that going anywhere besides passing in the House. I think it already has passed in the House.
Yeah, it's House. It won't go anywhere in the Senate.
No way.
And I think at that point, that buys a little bit of time. But here, think of this, though. There's not right now, at this moment, aside from that issue, something that we're completely divided and torn apart on, that we care about, that's like up on the top priorities of most Americans.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since you could say that. So again, I think anybody is going to be very reluctant to push an issue that might then, reverberate through political costs of all those other things we just talked about. and getting anything done. Nobody wants to go back to gridlock, I think. So I think everybody's looking and saying, okay, what can we edge forward where? Okay, we're making some progress here. Nobody wants to throw a grenade on that.
Right. It feels a lot like gun control. We're going to talk about that more later, in that there are so many measures that make sense to just about anyone who hears them. Like, for example, part of this George Floyd Justice Police bill is requiring a police officer to intervene when he sees another police officer using too much force. Just about everyone says, oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, I like that. It's like
except for police unions.
Except for the police unions. It's like
whoa, hold on now.
It's like just about everyone says expanding background checks to buy guns. Yeah, that makes sense. Except for the NRA.
Right.
Nobody there wants that. And so it feels like, even though there is common ground right now, it feels like there's this major gulf between the two sides. I think there's common ground, but you're right. No one's going to get even a morsel because the tensions are so high right now, and everyone feels like they're so dug in. So we need the news cycle to cool off, which actually is a beautiful transition to my final grade category: stabilizing the news cycle. A+. So overall, we're going to go ahead and calculate his GPA at about a 3.1. How about?
All right, I give him a C+ overall.
All right, there you go. So Joe Biden, pretty good, better than I thought.
C+, B- in there, yeah.
Yeah, in the like B range. He's done a better job than I thought. He's not the candidate that most progressives wanted. There's been far more done to please progressives than piss them off, which I think you got to take. There's some things that have certainly pissed progressives off, but we knew who Joe Biden was.
And there's just been a lack of chaos, which I'm so grateful for.
It's been beautiful. That A+ in his final category is really lifting the GPA average.
All right, let's move on to Brendan's bad take of the week.
Okay. Have we had Josh Hawley in the bad take of the week yet?
We have not.
Oh, we've got a first timer. Lucky you, Josh. So this is our senator friend from Missouri. Josh Hawley has made a recent name for himself for being the lone antagonistic, will never vote yes for anything as long as I'm in the Senate senator. There was just a bill recently that passed like 98-1. Well, I can't remember. Was it the? I think it was the racial discrimination against Asians bill. Literally everyone in the Senate voted for it except for Josh Hawley. He voted against every single one of Joe Biden's cabinet members. He's just been a big thorn in the side ever since the insurrection, which he proudly supported, by the way. Josh Hawley finds himself in the bad take of the week segment for something he put out on Twitter. This is what he wrote. The corporate media and the woke mob don't want you to read this book. They tried to cancel it. They failed. 1 week until publication. Order here. And the name of Josh Hawley's big, exciting book is The Tyranny of Big Tech by Josh Hawley. There was just one problem with his tweet. Well, first of all, it was on Twitter.
We've got quite a few in there, right?
So big tech number 1, check. Then down at the bottom of his tweet, it says it was uploaded with Twitter for iPhone. I believe that's Apple.
That's an Apple product. Big tech number 2.
Big tech number 2. Number 3, the link to his book where he says order here. That's right.
He's
Amazon.
funding Jeff Bezos, isn't he? Oh.
Amazon.com.
Say it isn't so, Josh.
So in his one tweet about the tyranny of big tech, he managed to somehow support 3 of tech's biggest tech.
Because remember, kiddos, big tech is only a problem when they're not lining your pockets.
It's such a farce. He doesn't care about big tech. But, Josh Hawley really is leading the like cultural and social issue charge in the right now, where he doesn't care about anything making sense. He doesn't care about policy whatsoever. He's just trying to throw red meat with to his constituency, and sometimes that means actual real red meat. Yeah. Because he was darn convinced that Joe Biden was going to make us cut 90% of our red meat.
I think he's really angling for, I'm the Matt Gaetz who doesn't fuck little girls.
Oh my God.
Part of the GOP ticket. Like,
Yeah.
I'm the guy with plastic hair and the red tie and the lapel pin who doesn't have 17-year-old girls flying out, to meet me.
I'm a little squeakier clean, and I'm going to appeal to all of Trump's demographic by just diving headfirst into these social issues.
And none of it's working, by the way.
Not
if
at
you look
all.
at his approval ratings or anything grabbing on, nothing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Josh.
Yeah, he thinks he's a presidential frontrunner, but you know what? He'll probably sell a lot of books.
And that's about it that we'll hear from Josh Hawley. All right, news rundown. We've got Bill Gates is under fire now from the far left for very different reasons than he was under from the far right. So while the far right thought that he was going to stick a microchip in you with his vaccine, we actually have some good intel about how Bill Gates is evil. And this is his stance on vaccine patents and not releasing them to developing countries. So he is championing the idea that no, we shouldn't give the resources and directions to third world countries that have a whole bunch of facilities that they say, hey, we can produce this if we have the know-how and the raw materials. Now, the Biden administration did just lift a barrier on exporting the raw materials. It took a little while, and it took India devolving into a COVID nightmare.
An absolute nightmare.
Yeah, which Modi is taking a lot of criticism for in his managing of, and for dunking on the rest of the world when he said 1.3 billion people and COVID couldn't, all right.
Yeah.
A little quick on that one, Mr. Modi. But Bill Gates, is trying to give this impression that these patent monopolies are really good for vaccine distribution, and that the way forward is to give them a ton of money to buy the actual vaccine doses at regular prices and then give them to developing countries. And he tried to make this argument that, hey, man, it has nothing to do with the supply end, because it's not like there's these magical factories out there just waiting to make vaccines. They really have to go through a rigorous amount of blah, 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 blah. And then a whole bunch of countries come out and said, yeah, except for this German factory that was just built last year that's empty, this one, this one, this one. And they're showing hermetically sealed chambers and all brand new stainless equipment with people in hats and gloves and all the mop gear and so forth. And they're like, we literally just need the materials and know-how. And here's a guy who, surprise, surprise, made a lot of his money off of patent monopoly and patent manipulation, sometimes in things that were developed with U.S. government funding, such as all of these vaccines have been.
Yeah.
Literally, all of the vaccines being used, even like Pfizer, who didn't take a bunch of the Trump Operation Warp Speed money, still were using technology that was government funded. So this idea, mRNAs in particular, are completely come from government funding. The taxpayer puts in the investment, and then the private company gets the patent and then holds on to it and manipulates the patent through making these tiny little changes to exchange it and make sure that, God forbid, you don't have the ability to get a generic version of a life-saving drug that's being applied to the vaccines. And if you look at Pfizer and some of the other companies and what they're telling shareholders about boosters and the cost and how frequently it looks like they're going to be needed now that we see how long the antibodies last, this is a big profit grab. And this should be a place where, okay, hey, you're going to be compensated duly for the work you did, like any other company during COVID. But the idea that we're going to allow these companies to make money hand over fist and loot the economies of all these places to and have American taxpayers subsidize the purchase so they can be sent to developing countries that could manufacture themselves if they were allowed to. It's just, to me, a shameful event.
It's disgraceful. And on top of that, it's bad for our own country's sense of vaccine hesitancy.
Yes.
There are so many people who are pointing the finger at Bill Gates, and not the idiots who are saying that he's trying to implant microchips, but there are so many people who are saying this is all a big media conspiracy designed to make the
Money.
rich
Yep.
ultra wealthy.
They're playing right into that.
They are, because you very clearly could say, listen, yes, I'm invested here. There's money at stake. We're all going to make billions on just the United States government paying these manufacturers to vaccinate Americans. Stop there and you're going to make billions.
Yes.
to then say, yeah, we need money from developing nations or even other wealthy nations that don't have the technology is going to make the tens of millions of people in the United States see it's a money grab.
Especially when it's going on at the same time where there's the effort to tamper the lab outbreak hypothesis.
Yeah.
So then when you have this whole, but it was definitely not in a lab, nothing to see here, definitely not in a lab. And then you have people saying, no, it probably did escape from the lab. Good, smart immunologist. And then you have on top of it, oh yeah, and by the way, we are making a ton of money, but listen, folks, none of that was planned. It just happened, and we took advantage of it. You know that old saying, never let a crisis go to waste. We profiteer off of everything. Haven't you been paying attention? We just show up and shake the pockets until a change falls out. It's what we do. It's why we have 100% of all new wealth created in the last 10 years in our class, because we're good at it. We don't need to make the things happen. We just need to exploit them, Brendan.
I defended you, Bill Gates. Fuck you, man. But listen, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle that, yes, we needed the vaccines, and yes, he would like to distribute them. And this is not some big wild conspiracy just for the, whatever it is, third richest man on earth to become the wealthiest man on earth again. But it sure looks like that now.
And hey, look at the other part where we were just talking earlier about the reason why you want to have a progressive tax structure and not have people accumulate too much wealth. Why in the fuck is some billionaire computer magnate at the table for everything? He's on this interview explaining this, saying, I have conference calls every day with the CEOs of the top it's like, well, why?
Yeah.
And why are you talking to global leaders, and why are you having a hand in? Oh, because you bought it.
Right.
Because you bought your way in, and now you get to set policy. You don't have the expertise. You don't have the background. Nobody elected you. You have no public accountability, but you got a shit ton of money. All the more reasons why we shouldn't let that much wealth accumulate in too few hands.
Because you become far more influential than any human being should. And you're
Absolutely.
right. Why is Bill Gates chiming in on...
None of it is merit-based.
He has no idea.
And it goes back to that old, U.S. mentality of, well, if he's made $1 billion, he must be really smart. He must know how to solve problems because he had to do it in business.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe he doesn't know shit about what he's talking about, and maybe he should go back and work about the fucking U.S. microprocessor shortage and advise on that. Hey, Bill, I'd love to fucking hear what you think about microprocessors, but stay the fuck out of world healthcare. We don't need you. Goodbye, Bill Gates. All right, next one. Next asshole of the week is Cesar Conde. This is on a roll. And Cesar, I should say. There's a missing E in there. And he is NBC News chairman, Brendan. And this is a first because not only is he the chairman of the news division, but he's also sitting on the board of Pepsi and Walmart.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
No conflict of interest here, though. You know why? He has assured everyone that he will recuse himself from working on any stories. First of all, you're the director of the division. You don't work on stories. You don't advise on stories. Here's what you do. You fire people, you give them promotions, you give them raises.
Yeah.
You don't have to say a word. You don't even have to wink. You don't even have to smile. People know beneath you what stories you might not be as attracted to.
When your public holdings are that public, they know what to write about and what not to criticize.
Yes, you don't have to give them bullet points. So Cesar Conde, step down or disassociate yourself from places like of all the places too. Pepsi and Walmart. It's oh, Jesus. Come on. All right, and here's one just for me again. The Pentagon has confirmed video of 3 triangular... We need an extra one. I didn't press it that time. That's weird. Thanks, Pentagon. They've confirmed...
Get Bill Gates to investigate that.
Right? 3 triangular UFOs filmed from a deck of a U.S. Navy craft. Cell phone video in 2019 that was released. Department of Defense has confirmed it is real footage. We don't comment on what we think of the unidentified flying object, but it is real. It was recorded, and that's that. I'm telling you, they're prepping us, baby. They're grooming us like a pedophile. They're letting us know that, hey, man, more and more of these things are happening, and people have better cameras in their cell phone than NASA used to have in the 60s. So we're not sure we can keep it a secret anymore because these guys just kind of do what they want. They show up when they do, and we're tired of, telling the story about the crazy guy who was talking about an anal probe to try to discredit people. It's not working anymore.
I think that in our first or second episode, you said they're going to start giving us these breadcrumbs. It looks like, and I think it's something by like June, right? Isn't
No, there was, so what it was a request by June.
That's right.
That the Pentagon would release to Congress and give them a briefing on all known information so far.
Yeah.
It's still a request. It's short of a demand, but it's by far the most that's ever been done. So again, I'll tell you, as curious as I am about it, I still don't think it's a good idea to tell the world because the world is mostly filled with fucking idiots. Take that to the bank. If you want to know one thing that's true, most people are dumb and most people can't handle the truth. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't give it to them or that the elite should decide who should have it. I'm just saying that there's probably good reason why for the last 50 years we haven't let everybody know that, hey, there's a bunch of people out there in the stars with tech that we don't even comprehend that could blow us up at every moment, but still go to your shitty job tomorrow,
Yeah.
get some Dunkin' on
Pay
the
your
way,
taxes.
power up, pay your taxes, and do a good job and be a good American, be a good citizen.
Men in Black was a documentary.
Possibly.
I will say, let's keep our eyes peeled on page 697 of the American Jobs Plan. They might squeeze in some more details into some obscure bill.
Let's hope so. All right, let's move on to our main topic today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, we covered mass shootings a couple times now, and as a response to the return to mass shooting normal, I guess we can call it, there have been several proposals for new gun control measures. And this has been an issue that, I've been a journalist for almost a quarter century, and it just comes up repetitively. There's something you grow numb to where you're just like, we always have the same talks. We always have the same conversations. We always write the same stories. Nothing ever changes. And this has really been one for me. So with apologies to anyone that this touches personally and has had a personal tragedy or crisis with this, it's something that my eyes gloss over. And I just have covered it so many times. And I don't believe in a nation of 400 million guns that we know of, we're ever going to really change that in any meaningful way, especially with how incredibly fervent the defenders of Second Amendment rights are.
Do you feel like that's eroding at all right now?
No, look at gun sales. More liberals bought guns during quarantine than any other time in human history or American history.
Jesus. I think that we are growing, our hearts are growing callous because they are numb from so many tragedies. And I was in high school when Columbine happened. I had met one of the young women who was one of the victims in like a high school debate tournament. And that was 15, 20 minutes down the road for me in Colorado. So I started very, very close to the that for me feels like the beginning of the nonsense was the Columbine shooting. Certainly there were shootings before that, but it feels like it has never stopped since then, other than the 1 year of quarantine that seems to be over now because we're back to shootings. And at Sandy Hook, that's when I lost so much hope. I thought if nothing happens after the most unspeakable tragedy of our lifetimes, 17 children, little tiny children, if nothing happens there, I don't know that it ever will. We have the Pulse nightclub shooting. We have the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school. We have so many that it's hard to even remember them all. And we're so tired of having these conversations. I don't think it is insulting to anyone to say it feels like we're stuck in the Twilight Zone because we're waking up. It's Groundhog Day. We're waking up every day. It feels like the same tragedy. We yell the same things. We kick and scream in the same ways. We cry, and then tomorrow it happens again. So how, as a human just dealing with trauma, how do you not start to grow numb to it if you're going to protect yourself emotionally from just having PTSD?
It's like people who live in a war zone,
You eventually have to stop crying when your fellow warriors are killed in battle because you can't break down every time it happens and more are coming. You have to, we have figured out a way to put this protective callousness around our hearts and our souls to function in society while these daily tragedies seem to be happening. So I was hoping you would say, yes, things are changing right now. It feels like the wound sort of healed for a time, a short amount of time. It's not like no mass shootings were happening. We had tons of mass shootings in 2020.
Well, let's dive into the remedy side of that issue. Let's ask the question, what can we do from a terms of gun control measures that will have a profound impact on lessening that? That's the part, like, I'm sorry, but every time I see a gun control debate in Congress, it looks the same as when I see them grilling big tech. It looks just, it's embarrassing.
Inept.
And it's there's all these ideas then that can ham-fistedly thrown together real quick from, sort of like a bill by committee type thing where it gets like these Frankenstein parts of all these different things that get cut in and added on and thrown out. And you end up with something that when you really drill down on I've never seen a proposed solution that I thought would work. You're not going to have the Australian solution. You're not going to have the turn in the guns.
Right. And there's very rarely a time that we think, well, if we would just pass that one bill, this would all be
There
okay.
are some people that say that, like the assault rifle thing. Again, I was a military officer. I don't keep a gun in my home, but I'm very comfortable with them. I've been around them a lot. I've fired all kinds of different ones, qualified with all different kinds of ones. There's no such thing as an assault rifle. That's like a made up term. Even the AR-15, there's a lot of people who confusingly think it stands for assault rifle. It does not.
Yeah.
It stands for Armalite, the company that makes it. And the caliber from that could be anything from a 22, little tiny 22, all the way up to the 5.56 that you'd see in an M16 military rifle. That's a big difference, but they look exactly the same.
Yeah.
And then you look at some hunting rifles with really high calibers that are like camouflage and look more like an old shotgun. And if you show two of them, somebody looks at the Armalite 22 and says, that's a weapon nobody should have in the street. It's like, actually, you can't even hunt certain things with that because it's not deadly enough and it's considered inhumane to shoot them with it. But this one over here could blow a hole through that wall bigger than my butt,
Right.
The idea of that you're going to regulate it by the kind of weapon, that seems really, really asinine.
And yet, there remains the argument. Well, okay, so this guy that just walked into the grocery store in Colorado, does he do as much damage with a handgun as he did with the rifle that he had? I think there's clear evidence that some guns, and I'm not a gun guy, I don't know guns at all, so please don't ask me about them. But I think there's still clear evidence that some guns, some types of guns, some stocks that you can add to guns can make them more deadly. Is there anything that we can do to allow the American people to keep having their Second Amendment and keep having their guns, but not have weapons of war on the street?
Here becomes the I think very valid question. One, most of those things you would be able to get because you'll never erase all the ones that already exist. So you'll have a secondary market.
There's
for
just too many super dangerous guns.
And here becomes the other part is that even if you didn't, you could make a bump stock with a 3D printer. You can make a gun with a 3D printer.
Right.
And then the other part becomes this is a fair argument that I think Second Amendment people make is who would abide by it? Not a person who's going to go commit a mass shooting.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're clearly not that concerned with what the penalty is for possessing that if they're going to commit suicide by cop while they mow down 30 people anyway. So again,
or if they don't die, living in the infamy of being one of America's mass shooters is appealing to some of these folks. Unfortunately, even as they sit in jail for 500 year sentences, they go in knowing I made myself famous.
Yeah. And I think it bears mentioning that and Columbine also, same thing for me. I was living out there at the time. I was at, it was real weird. I was in Aurora that day. I was at a gym up there. I was at the time at the Olympic Training Center as an amateur boxer in Colorado Springs, and we had the week off, and I went up to spar with a friend who was training in Aurora, and I was driving back and got rerouted by all the police cars and everything.
Oh, man.
And had no idea what was going on, flipped from the CD to the radio, and turned out like I had to look on a map, and I was like an actual map because there's no cell phones, and it was like, oh my God, that's right down the road from where I'm at. And it was a real odd feeling to be like right up against it when it happened. And you're right, it does seem like that, but the truth is they're incredibly rare events. So even though you can look at it historically and say, well, they've doubled over that period, you're still talking about something. I heard someone put it the other day that I think bears repeating. If it was a 1 in a million thing, we'd be having one a day.
That's true. There's 340 million.
It's not even close to one a day. Mm-hmm. So it's lottery ticket type affliction.
Well, if you're talking about the national media coverage, random act of terrorism,
I'm talking about by
events.
definition, the 4 or more people.
Well, even 4 or more people happens far more often than our news cycle can keep up with, and we don't cover them all.
True, but the vast majority of times when it's 4 or more people, it's gang on gang violence,
right.
criminal on criminal
right.
violence.
And those are the ones.
That's a hard thing
right.
to like.
So when we talk about mass shootings, oftentimes people think what we mean is when someone says, "Oh gosh, there's been 200 mass shootings this year," people are imagining 200 psychopaths walked into a grocery store, and we need to end that. Right.
I think it's important to detangle that because I hope this doesn't sound crass, but I'm infinitely more interested in stopping the madman from shooting innocent, unarmed people just because he decides everybody in Kroger's is going to die today.
He was just having a bad day. And
then I am
friendless.
about 4 people involved in criminal activity getting shot by 4 other people, a drug deal gone bad or a shootout with the police or something like that.
Right.
I think it does an injustice when you put them together. And I think a lot of times gun reform advocates deliberately muddy the numbers up to try to make it seem, and then it gives it more gravity when here's another horrific one and it's been this of the year. And you're like, really? There's been that many? No, he's kind of thrown it in because there was a gang shootout in Chicago last week too. You know what I mean?
Or a domestic, a birthday party gone wrong and someone pulls out a gun and a bunch of people get shot and maybe nobody even dies, but that's still mass shooting. Mm-hmm. And that happens way more than people realize. Sure. Way more. So again, it feels like we can't do nothing. We have grown tired. I think one thing that we can do when we're talking about these just domestic terror gun events, I have always said our treatment of the shooter needs to change. That is a gun control measure that has nothing to do with changing the legality of guns. That can change somehow. I've always, this will never happen ever because we have journalists and people want to know and people have to understand and process, and we have to find out the shooter's name and we have to find out their story and we have to find out we have to talk to their best friend from childhood. I have always said we should stop doing that. If you commit a mass murder like this, you should be wiped off the face of the earth. No one ever knows who you are. No one ever, we don't talk to your family. We don't interview your mom and ask her if she feels bad. We don't talk to your friend from middle school or your neighbor or your coworkers or anything. You just become a nobody, a ghost. You go away forever. Even at the trial, we don't tell people who you are because that is a big draw to these people who have feelings of inadequacy. We've talked about this before, feeling like they are never going to be biologically relevant in the country. They are isolated. They don't have friends. They don't have meaning in their lives. Now we've got social media to remind us every day that we're never going to be famous. So there's this feeling of total insecurity and the idea that I can suddenly become very relevant, if not famous, even though it's for an evil thing, is too appealing for people who have mental issues and or just evil motivation. I think that it's too easy now.
I'll tell you as a journalist, though, the only way you'd ever do that is by statute with hefty penalties.
And again, how do you do that?
Which I'd be fine with, I guess, because I agree with you in principle.
But again, that's a major constitutional freedom of speech and freedom of press issue.
It's not going to happen.
Doesn't make sense.
Let's parse down the numbers a little bit. Here's another one that so you've got about, if you go to 2017, it's 39,800 people died from gun-related injuries.
And now that includes suicide,
which is about 2/3 of it.
Right.
So now let's dig into that a little bit, because then again, that's one where I feel like the gun reform advocates, I just want to have an honest conversation about all public policy parts. So I don't like when either side is disingenuous. And I see definitely there's some with the 2A crowd that is disingenuous, but on the gun control side, you have a lot where they kind of project it like that 40,000 is gun violence.
Right.
And then it's like when somebody breaks out, well, about 28,000 of them are suicides, then, or close to it. Then they're like, well, most evidence is that people that commit suicide with a gun wouldn't if they didn't have the gun, or, and there's some veracity to that. Like, the truth is that people who overdose, more than half of them call 911 afterward.
Yeah.
So, like, you in the vast majority of instances can't do that with a gunshot. But then the question becomes, is it the state's job to prevent suicide? And especially if it would mean limiting or reducing other people's freedoms and rights.
Well, again, you have the right problem and the wrong solution, meaning, yes, we should do more to help people who feel like they need to take their own lives. Taking guns away isn't going to be the most effective.
I feel like you're stopping at the very last point of intervention there.
Right. And what we need to do is intervene earlier.
Way earlier, yeah.
Make mental health, a far bigger priority, and also work really hard to destigmatize getting help, pursuing help. We should be able to find it. We need to detach it from our healthcare system, because right now, if I'm just a regular guy on the street and I'm having issues, I don't know the first thing to do to get help. I could call the police. What am I going to do? Flip open a phone book or go online and Google therapist, and then I call and they say, we're not taking new patients, or what's your insurance? Or, oh, by the way, I don't take any insurance. It's $200 a session. I mean, there's such a huge obstacle to go from I need help to getting help, that going and buying a gun is actually a lot more frictionless.
Yeah.
So, yes, you could make the argument that if we just took away all guns, then yes, 20, 30,000 people a year would not be killing themselves with guns. What percentage of them would be committing suicide in a different way?
We'd never know.
Probably not 100%, but probably not zero either.
Right.
It's probably still a good number of those people finding another way, because let me tell you something, getting enough pills to kill yourself, not that hard, and also painless.
Yeah.
So I think you'd see that skyrocket if there were no guns. You have the same exact issue, and then you'd be chasing around another totally different solution to the same exact problem. You'd say, all right, well, no prescription drugs for anyone. So no, I think suicide is a huge part of and I'll call it gun violence. I think it is part of the gun violence. It's just not the way we think about it societally.
Yeah, I think it has to be detangled in all conversations with it. I look at it and I've had an inordinate amount of experience with suicide. I grew up in a very, very economically depressed, hollowed out post-industrial part of Appalachia, where, when I remember talking to friends when I got older and then being stunned when they're like, "Do you ever know anybody killed?" Oh yeah, I remember one of my close friends in 7th grade killed himself. Then I remember another one in 8th grade. And I'm like, I'm up to like 8. Our graduating class was only 157.
Wow.
So I was up to like 8 by high school. And then I did a count the other day and was at somewhere close to 3 dozen with people I grew up with who've only in my hometown, home county, people I grew up with who've killed themselves to date. I could think of almost 3 dozen off the top of my head.
Wow.
Which other people were like, holy shit, that is not normal, dude. I know 0 or I know 1.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not that I don't have sympathy and empathy, because I've known the families. And I'll tell you what, God, the first one, his dad was my football coach in junior high, and we were very close, and I was close to his brother. And God, it was a heartbreaking story. He was at a party, and his good buddy had this 1970 Chevelle SS, and buddy had a bit of a drinking problem. The kid's 16. Buddy passes out drunk. Buddy's girlfriend, my dad's going to kill me. I wasn't home on time last time. I'm going to be grounded forever. Don't worry, I'll give you a ride home. He's not drunk or anything. He gives her a ride home, wrecks the Chevelle on the way back, decides at 16, wrecking this classic, mint condition car was not a survivable event.
Wow.
And again, I use this example for my son and try to say, imagine 40-year-old him looking back had he not done that. And the complete, he probably have a family and kids and all these different things, and saying, God, that I was thinking about giving all that up for that moment that now looks back like, yeah, we had a laugh about that. I got in some trouble and, it all went away. Yeah. It really is a permanent problem or a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And you look at that, and that father, I still see him from time to time, and he's never recovered. He looks like a hollow shell of a man. Mm-hmm. The brother who found him in the bathroom where it happened and literally had to clean up afterward and described it in detail has never looked the same, ever, since then. They both just literally look like shells of what used to be people. And so there's no lack of empathy there, but I just don't know that you legislate away something as seminal as suicide, which is as old as humanity. The numbers...
That just can't be your reasoning. You can't you can't say we're out to stop suicides and therefore we're going to do something with guns. That's not the solution. There are plenty of reasons to regulate guns.
To flip this around to the right, how I would tell people on the right who are most likely pro-2A, it's kind of like the abortion issue. And I've always said that, look, if you really believe in what you believe is the problem, and it's not about a virtue signaling, and it's not about, enforcing your beliefs and morality on other people. If it really is about life, don't you think you'd be a lot more successful starting way earlier in the process? Not just trying to, have bullshit legislation about, admitting privileges and how big a hallway have to be in an abortion clinic to try to just throw a wrench in somebody's ability to make that choice. What if you did things like, hey, try to more normalize keeping a baby and giving it up for adoption? Right now, you're looked at as a monster. Right. If you come into work for 9 months with a big bulging belly and then all of a sudden you don't, and they're like, hey, how's the baby? And it's like, oh, I didn't want to have a baby, so instead I gave it to a family who couldn't. Right. You're not considered a good person for doing that. That's kind of socially, dogged by our culture.
And protesting abortion clinics to stop abortion is the same as saying we need to stop suicides. Right. So we're going to regulate guns. Exactly. You're too late. Yeah. You're far too late in the process to solve that particular issue. So yeah, I agree. That's a good analogy.
So if we look at demographics, here's an interesting one. The typical person who commits suicide is overwhelmingly exactly like me. My age, white guy, middle class, in his 40s.
Really?
That is like almost without fail. So I look at that, and that's also, so there's more to like drill down into there, because that's also what I increasingly see in the homeless population. Able-bodied white males in their 40s and early 50s who just kind of have chosen to drop out of society at a certain point. So that hopelessness is something that I think we need to examine, but it could have a lot to do with just a recalibrating of society to have more equity for other people. And that could leave the privileged class feeling oversensitive to the recalibration and bringing balance with other people who didn't enjoy the privilege for that long. Yeah. That could have a lot to do with it. And again, I don't think the guns change that.
No, but it's interesting, just as a side note, while we're speaking about suicide, is that something that is often overlooked is that for major gun incidences, one repercussion is that after the fact, months, weeks, even a year after the fact, suicides around gun incidences also spike.
Way up, yeah.
Because of the survivor's guilt, the PTSD, the depression, so many things that are...
And it just makes an idea a reality.
Right. And the shockwaves after the initial earthquake shooting reverberate in these suicides around each one.
There was that small town, I think it was in Michigan, it was somewhere up in the upper Midwest, where a couple of years ago they went through this epidemic where it was a very small town and inordinately high. It was like over a dozen young kids killed themselves within like an 18-month period. It was remember
right.
that?
Yes.
And they couldn't put their finger on it. And that's what the psychologists were bringing up that phenomenon. And so I think we just have a exacerbated level of that.
Of the exposure to the reality.
Yes.
Which gives, there was like, it wasn't even possibly like one school.
Yeah. It was I think they only had one school. It's a very, very small town.
Yeah. And when you see that much death, it becomes so much more of a possibility. So it's just another thing that, again, and we don't talk about that as much as we talk about regulating assault rifles, right?
So I think we're in agreement that there are some things we could do. I think closing the gun show loophole
Huge.
is one of those obvious.
Totally
if you need a background
obvious.
check, you should need one all the time.
Yep.
And you should not, if you want to use that argument, and gun show loophole is just part, it's really the private sale loophole is to be more accurate. And anytime you buy one off Craigslist or something, there's no background check done. And if somebody's going to say, to make the argument that only, bad people have guns if you make them illegal, well, who else or what process are you incentivizing a bad person to take other than the one where you don't have to do a background check?
Gun show or person-to-person sale is exactly where bad guys are going to get guns all the time. Yes.
And I think from a mental health perspective, I don't think too many reasonable people would argue that a doctor, mental health professional, or immediate family member being able to have at least a temporary prohibition on somebody's ability to have guns because of behavior that they've shown, threats that they've made, whatsoever. There are, I believe, 12 states now that have laws on the books that allow for that. Florida is not one of them. The NRA shut that down when about within the last decade, early part of the last decade, it was brought up. I think reasonable people will agree on that as well. And I think the big one, though, is, look, this is it's like homelessness when we say it's not the issue. It's just a symptom of the underlying issues. If we don't invest in mental health, these and other, just parade of horrors are going to continue to plague our society.
Substance abuse. We know this. Racial inequity, the health of all of these are mental health related offshoots. And the gun one is a huge one because it provides an avenue for crime and also an avenue for a solution to the depression and the self mental health issues, which is an easy way out. So it's contributing in a huge way. Back to those red flag laws that you were talking about. There's a fantastic episode of the New York Times podcast.
Yes,
Daily.
they had the one in Indiana, that case.
The Indiana red flag law that completely fell apart.
Yep. And that showed how challenging even that is.
Right.
Where it was well intended.
Right. They have a law in place for exactly such a situation as we had, where a young man's mother literally said, I'm scared. My son just bought a gun and he's either going to harm himself or someone else, and I'm scared. And, he's into the system there. He's into the system. They took the gun. He was evaluated. Eventually just kind of fell apart in the system, though. And these legislators, or I believe it was actually the attorneys in Indiana, were saying the law is written in such a bullshit way that you can't follow through on it. You have to prove all these things in 2 weeks that you can't. Right. And the chances of us failing are virtually 100% to do that.
And as a result, we don't want to spend the resources in trying to do this.
And even worse, if we lose, we have to give the gun back.
Yep.
So they said, our victory is that we got his gun, and if he wants it, there's a ton of red tape, and he's probably... But guess what? Then the guy's walking free.
And he's allowed to go
perfectly legally, goes and buys a gun, right, and shoots up a FedEx. So the law did nothing. We got one gun from one scary guy who ultimately got another one too easy. So it seems that those red flag laws are another real no-brainer that both sides should say, yeah, people with mental health issues should not... And people who are flagged. But again, you have people on the right fighting it, saying, well, that'll be an easy way to take away the guns from someone who's perfectly sane, is just call him crazy.
Right.
And then, you're infringing on his rights.
And if they're not working, then they have a great argument to say, you shouldn't infringe on my right because this isn't an effective method anyway, you know?
Right. So, yes, we have red flag laws in some states, but they're broken. They're not all that effective.
Hey, and finally, here's one other big thing, folks. End the war on drugs.
Big time. Tomorrow.
Come on, this is the seed of the poison that we're all drinking afterward. This is what causes a large number of those non-suicide gun deaths. If you took out the war on drugs, that would go down drastically because of the criminal activity and criminal enterprises that only exist to facilitate the demand for that. And I'll tell you what, with all the different drugs that they're putting people with mental health on, I'd much rather see most of them on cannabis and a good dose of mushrooms. We'll leave it with that. All right, for Brendan Ragan, I'm Mitch. Oh, that's still on?
Still
man?
going.
Calm down, Twilight Zone. For Brendan Ragan, I am Mitch Maley, and this has been another episode of Punk Rock Politics, the podcast. Join us next Friday, and as always, check us out on YouTube and at punkrockpolitics.com.